You're listening to the N2K Space Network.
Welcome to T-Minus Deep Space. I'm Maria Varmazes, host of the T-Minus Space Daily Podcast. Deep Space includes extended interviews and bonus content that takes a deeper look into some of the topics that we cover on our daily program. We hope you enjoy. Today, I'm speaking with two people for my interview: Timur Davis, director at Munich Re Ventures, and Peter Ortez, principal at Munich Re Ventures. So let's start off with an introduction to what Munich Re Ventures is and what it does, with Peter Ortez answering first.
Munich Re Ventures is the corporate venture arm of Munich Re, which is a large global reinsurer and insurer. And our goal as a CVC is to go out and invest in companies and technologies that are impacting the broader risk transfer space. One of those areas that Munich Re is quite active in is the insurance of space assets. So insuring launch vehicles, insuring stuff in space is a key area of activity that Munich Re operates in and is one of the leaders in that sector. And so as investors at MRV, we are looking quite broadly in a bunch of different topics. And one of those topics is space. And our investment thesis really centers around what's coming next for the space industry. If we think back a few years, we can look to the LEO revolution as sort of a huge topic that pushed the economics of space in a different direction. And for the space insurance industry, Munich Re was, instead of insuring, $100 million spacecraft, maybe we're insuring $100 million spacecraft. And so it's things like that we want to think about, with respect to what are the new technology changes disrupting the current space industry as we know it. And so our current investment thesis has really centered around what we're calling the in-space economy. The idea of companies that are, doing space-based services for space-based applications, as opposed to what we've seen, in this robust first wave of the new space revolution in companies that are doing space-based services that ultimately have their direct customers, as a user on Earth, whether that's for Earth observation or communications or things like that. So the goal is in space for space, and we're looking at a lot of these technologies, such as refueling, life extension, as key questions and key interesting topics that the insurance industry down the road will have to and should be excited to address.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of quick things. On the insurance topic, what's really interesting is that, historically, space insurance has been similar to the space industry itself, right? Very sort of one-off, exquisite products with very specific applications that are very expensive. Peter said, as the trend has shifted from $100 million spacecraft to $101 million spacecrafts, the insurance industry has been a little bit slow to catch up, because the existing underwriting methodologies that work when you're doing one deal a year don't work when you're doing 100 deals a year, obviously. And so as Munich Re is shifting from this kind of old space to new space, they are relying on us as the kind of the venture capital team and the tip of the spear, to find kind of innovative new companies, invest in them, and then bring them into the fold, so to speak, and help our colleagues in Munich, really understand what's around the corner, what's, past the horizon in the space industry, so that they could develop new products and, new business models and new types of insurance to accommodate, what's on the horizon. And so in terms of the topics that we've been focusing on with our in-space economy thesis, it's essentially what Peter just said. It's about, one, refueling, and in general, sort of the infrastructure that would make the business model close, so to speak. So we invested in a company called OrbitFab. In fact, we led the seed round of OrbitFab in 2020 with kind of this idea that if a future space economy emerges, refueling will need to be a key part of that, right? Like today, when you purchase your car, you don't kind of drive it off the lot until it runs out of fuel and then dump it at the side of the road and go purchase a new car. The same, concept applies with OrbitFab. We then expanded our thesis with sort of the second big topic, which is space domain awareness. And there we invested in a company called Okapi Orbits, which is a space domain awareness slash, space traffic management company, where again, we led the seed round. And here, the idea is as you have more spacecraft in space, and they're now being refueled and doing useful, sort of services on each other, you need to have some kind of highway traffic control, right? As space gets more crowded, as you're trying to avoid the Kessler syndrome of sort of, collisions setting off a chain reaction of collisions that ultimately pollute all of space. And so that was our second bet. And then finally, third, earlier in 2023, we led the Series A of Starfish Space, which is a company doing both mission extension in GEO as well as debris removal in LEO. And there, the idea is old space is not dead, right? GEO satellites are still incredibly important and incredibly relevant. And if anything, I think we're starting to see the pendulum maybe start to turn a little bit in the favor of GEO. And in that case, if you can extend the life of a 20-year asset to 25 years or what have you, then there is, tremendous economic benefit that you can create. And in fact, those economic models can be sort of completely rewritten. And then on the LEO kind of debris removal side, this is, I think there's still questions around how the business model of debris removal will work. But ultimately, it's going to be critically important in LEO to have, a safe and clean, highway that the SDA guys will then be able to help monitor.
If you kind of look back across where we've invested and how we've invested, we're really looking at, infrastructure and, to use an overused term, like platform plays in this sector. We look at something like Orbit Fab as kind of laying the groundwork. We look at something like an Okapi Orbits in the space domain awareness sector as kind of providing a key piece of information and insight to these companies. And then when we looked at Starfish, it was the opportunity to have a platform for in-space servicing that was really, targeted towards several different, sectors and parts of the space ecosystem. So I think when we think that's the other key part of our investment thesis is, it's the picks and shovels plays. It's the folks that are, addressing a wide range of critical, needs in the sector gets us really excited.
That picks and shovels phrase in that fabulous piece that you published on Medium, which we'll make sure we link as well, it really stuck in my mind because it does summarize it so well. It made me wonder, because we cover these incredible companies, and I'm a big fan of what they're doing. When we talk about what they're innovating, a lot of it is looking towards the future. When we're getting ready for when we need these services, and we're starting to use them now, but we're getting ready for it. What do we think is the timeline for something like this? Because we're starting to get geared up for all these things, but what are we actually realistically looking at for when we're going to really see these things go?
Yeah, I don't think we quite have a crystal ball on that part yet. But what I think we're excited about is there's a lot of stuff happening, in the near term that's really moving us in this direction of, where we think we're going, which is this world of us living. I think Jeff Bezos uses the phrase like living and working in space. And I think folks like, Orbit Fab are looking to, have assets in space that they're, Starfish, I think as well, that they're, looking at testing and working on. And, to provide key information to figure out how the next mission is going to go. I think with respect to some of these elements like space domain awareness is happening now, right? We're looking at tracking all this debris and all of these different, items and assets in space to understand how we're going to react when these, scary moments that are of impending collisions are starting to happen more and more frequently. I think, we look at commercial partners as saying, hey, we're ready to kind of jump in and explore this in the next, 3 to 5 years to at least get, let's call it a demonstrator satellite up and exploring how these customers are ultimately going to interact with the startups. I think one example that we've seen, and it's not in the startup space, but, Northrop Grumman launching and executing their mission extension vehicle program was a good like planting the flag in the ground, saying that we are kind of in this era of in-space servicing, and it's now answering the question of commercial scale up and getting this to be a repeatable, more regular activity. So I kind of rambled a little bit there, but I think in summary, there's a long-term view that's, it could be, maybe decades before we're at like a steady state, everything, existing in space like it is on the ground. But I think where we are now is we're in that crucial proving ground of how do we make sure that these technologies are the ones to move us in that direction.
And maybe just to add one quick point, we consciously, I think, avoided some, investment opportunities into companies that don't have these intermediate success points between now and the vision coming to fruition. Because there are all sorts of great ideas out there and excellent teams that are, doing stuff that really won't have traction for a decade, right? Or longer. And obviously that's all really important and a key part of the in-space economy. But we think that the infrastructure has to be built first. And on the infrastructure front, we are seeing incremental steps that are kind of leading us toward that promised land. And we, when we look at investment targets, we want to see the pathway, that roadmap that incorporates those incremental steps.
We'll be right back after this quick break. So given that you're looking at companies with a vision, with, again, those milestones, as you mentioned, and given that you're looking for those picks and shovels kinds of firms with that kind of ambition, what kind of startups are you looking at? And maybe I should say, what kind of startups aren't you looking at? Like what appeals to you when you're going to look around at startups and you go, these folks have a clear path and we really dig what they're doing, and we think that they've got something viable, or versus that they're not going to go the distance?
Yeah, I think with respect to what we're looking at, it's companies with teams that have been in and around this industry for a bit, whether that's in the academic setting, whether that's having worked at other startups or space companies. It's interesting. We're kind of in this second wave of a space startup rush, where probably 2015 to 17 we had the Planet Labs, we had the acquisition of Skybox in 2013. We started to see the beginning of what was once not considered a venture investment at all, and now something where we're seeing those entrepreneurs who came from other space startups taking what they've learned and bringing them to a new company. So I think we're looking for teams that really know the industry, the sector well, but who are also looking at things with fresh eyes and figuring out, okay, here's the challenges of the last few years. Here's how we can innovate on them. As Timur mentioned, we like to see companies that have some sort of path towards, initial commercialization or initial, de-risking. What I think we're a little bit more wary of is those companies that have really grand visions, but it's only going to be an all or nothing sort of outcome, and we're not going to know until their first major milestone that may be 5 to 10 years away. So I think that's a little bit where we stay away from. And I think what we also like to see is companies that are going after sort of known or understood pockets of demand in the space industry. Trying to create new markets, especially when you need a lot of capital to do that, is a bit challenging. So, each of our investments has been in a sector where folks are really crying out for, hey, we either don't have this or we want this, but we want it better. And I think that's really exciting. I think where we typically stay away is as I previously mentioned, those binary outcomes around, whether there's capital here or not. And we also tend to stay away from spaces where we see, a ton of competition from other startups and from the incumbents. We like to look at those places where the incumbents are either not thinking or viewing it as not, core to their business.
Just to add maybe a quick thing to Peter's wonderful response, I think we want folks that have demonstrated a little bit of traction before we invest. So although we're happy to be seed investors, the way we say it is we don't like to fund science projects. So we want to see technology that's, at least somehow being taken out of the lab and sort of brought into more of a startup or more of a commercial domain. So using OrbitFab would be a great example wherein they had demonstrated fluid transfer on the International Space Station by refueling a water tank with their fueling port before we had invested. And so, they had their fueling port in space doing fluid transfer. That's a great bit of progress that I think really demonstrates the viability of the technology. So that's one. We've seen the kind of the DoD and sort of all the associated organizations and agencies play a really big role in the space for obvious reasons. And that role is, if anything, increasing as geopolitical kind of situations evolve. But that having been said, we really want to focus on companies that are commercial kind of first or dual use, right? So we won't discount the military side of things. And obviously it's very important and a great way, especially early on, to get traction. But ultimately, we are focusing on folks that are targeting the commercial sector. And I think that's an important differentiation point. And then maybe third, as Peter was saying on the capital front, I think we are keen on folks that are, as capital efficient as one can get. Obviously, it's space, we're building stuff. There are some software plays, but most things are hardware and it's expensive and it's complex. But I still think there are kind of different levels on that scale. We are a little bit, I would say, hesitant or reticent to go kind of to the most capital intense side of that spectrum. And we want to see folks that have innovative business models and innovative ways to be, if not capital light, at least capital medium.
Fair enough. Given the fascinating context of MRV within the Munich Re group, so we're talking not just insurance and venture capital and insurance together, risk is a big part of what you both are dealing with. So this is a philosophical question, admittedly. So what is your approach to risk?
I mean, I think risk is what makes this industry, right? It's not venture capital if there's not risk and things that are uncertain, right? Otherwise, we'd be putting our money in bonds. What we want to do here is we want to go after companies that have an edge on that risk reward balance, right? Where they can see, okay, we understand the risks that are out there, and here's why we, as individuals, as technology, as a business model, as builders of all these three things, are uniquely positioned to gain more reward than the rest of the industry can from this sector. So we're not. I would say we as investors are not afraid, to take early stage risks if we see something that really indicates this could work out really well, or these folks really have an edge here. I think, as Timur said, we want to see somebody validating things from the outside. This science or technology risk isn't there, or the science risk isn't something we want to take. But I think in this sector there are a lot of really smart people that are really going after this idea of we're engineers. We've been engineers at this company or that company for a while. We think we know how to do this in a different way. We want to take what we learned from other industries and kind of merge them into this interdisciplinary approach to, the space industry. And, that's a way folks are getting around some of this early stage risk that exists in space. So, it's exciting. It's also unavoidable. And so when we make investments, we want to make sure that we feel as good as we can about the risks we're taking on. I think what's tough and what I think the insurance industry also hates is this idea, unquantifiable risk is risk that, we can't put a price on it. Therefore, we want to stay away from it.
And maybe just to add, in some cases, we think we can help kind of bend that risk curve a little bit, or the arc of that curve, and offer some kind of advantage to our portfolio companies, and then that can help support our investment as well, right? So using space domain awareness as kind of a low-hanging fruit, one can envision a world wherein if a satellite operator uses an SDA platform to track their assets as well as everything else, then maybe kind of their insurance premiums or the risk of their constellation is different than folks who don't use a space domain awareness platform, right? And in that case, maybe, pricing is a little different. Now, I'm saying this theoretically, but I think insurance is, often overlooked, but is, especially in the space world, interestingly, is an incredibly sort of important tool to help balance and transfer some of that risk. And so we feel like there are many opportunities where Munich Re, kind of the broader organization, including ourselves as the venture capital, but also all the underwriting capabilities and beyond, can kind of bend that arc of risk a little bit and create, unfair outcomes in our favor, so to speak, in terms of the risk-reward balance.
Thank you both so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time. And that's it for T-Minus Deep Space for June 23rd, 2023. We'd love to know what you think of our podcast. You can always email us at space@n2k.com or submit the survey in our show notes. Your feedback ensures that we deliver the information that keeps you a step ahead in the rapidly changing space industry. This episode was produced by Alice Carruth, mixing by Elliot Peltzman and Trey Hester, with original music and sound design by Elliot Peltzman. Our executive producer is Brandon Karpf. Our chief intelligence officer is Eric Tillman. And I'm Maria Varmazes. Thanks for listening.